Gonzo Education by Gregory Brandt. Chapter 2, 72 Chevy. It was early spring and hot and humid when I got out of jail. I had a clean mind and body and had never been so optimistic about the future. I was off probation and I hadn't smoked, drank, or had a single piece of candy in 4 months. I was so upbeat you'd think I'd be giving a self-help seminar. Michael took the bus to the downtown jail and waited across the street for me to get out. He greeted me with a handshake and Marlboro Red cigarette. He said he'd spoken to Mom and Guy and they said I could sleep on their couch. I told him I appreciated the offer, but I wasn't interested. Getting out of jail was a riveting experience, and I felt I could take over the world. I planned on joining the military, and the last thing I wanted to do was sleep on my mom's filthy couch. Michael and I caught a bus to Mom's house and waited in her living room for her to get home from work. When she opened the door, she dropped her groceries and gave me a big hug. She had a tear in her eye as she looked me up and down, making sure I was the same person and hadn't broken any bones. I told her I felt great and promised I'd never go back to jail again. I tried telling her about my plans to join the military, but she was just happy I was alive. Later that evening, Benny, Jonathan, and Janet came over, and I entertained everyone with amusing stories about my time incarcerated. My first night out of jail, I slept in a tent in Mom's backyard. Michael eventually convinced me to come inside. Their house was packed to the ceiling with boxes of useless crap that Guy, her husband, tried to sell at the flea market every weekend. The only space available was on the tattered sofa, which smelled like dirty socks and corn chips. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sounds of the Price is Right game show, and it didn't take long to realize how uneventful life can sometimes be. By the end of the week, I'd smoked enough weed to realize that joining the military wasn't for me. Sitting on a rooftop counting falling stars, I came to the conclusion that I was going to fight battles that I believed in. After a month of living on Mom's couch, I got a call from one of our sisters in Austin. She heard I got out of jail and invited me to stay with her in the expensive duplex our father bought her. She was finishing her last semester of an advertising degree at the University of Texas, and she had an extra bedroom. I jumped at the chance to get out of San Antonio. I probably would have moved to Austin months earlier, but I had that bitch of a probation lagging over my head. Michael and I had been there a few times, and it always seemed like a faraway location where everything was fresh and more exciting than anything in San Antonio. We'd never even been to a coffee shop before we visited one in Austin, Texas. Before I ever set foot in Austin, I pictured myself living there and going to school at the University of Texas. When you grow up in Texas, one of the first decisions young people make is whether they're an Aggie or a Longhorn. Most kids at our school sided with the Longhorns, but there were a few rebellious ones that go the other way and wear Aggie garb. I took a full year before making up my mind. There were so many Aggie jokes going around Texas that I wondered why anyone would want to associate with them. I thought there must be some mystical reason why they joined the sparsely populated Aggie camp instead of the vast Longhorn Brigade. I found the Aggie mysticism appealing, but after comparing the school's respected hand signals, I realized the University of Texas was the superior institution. Aggie hand symbol, Longhorn symbol. Aggies, yay. Longhorns, hook 'em. This was my first summer in Austin. My sister was busy with school, work, and a job internship. She was hardly ever home, and that meant that I had the place to myself. I took advantage of the situation and invited all types of characters to her lower middle class duplex. Every day I'd hang out on the street adjacent to UT known as the Drag. One of my first days in Austin, there was a parade for Heisman Trophy winner Ricky Williams. I felt a sense of community in Austin unlike anything I ever experienced on the north side of San Antonio. I savored my days and did things I couldn't back home, like hanging out in coffee shops, arcades, and bookstores in the most urban neighborhood I'd ever been in. I met a smorgasbord of people associated with UT and spent hours writing poetry, flirting with girls, and playing the wide variety of cheap arcade games against the local group of homeless kids known affectionately to the people of Austin as drag rats. When I wanted a moment to myself, I'd slip into the Dobie Mall food court and stare out the second story window, daydreaming. Dobie Mall is a pseudo mall located a few yards off campus. It's one of the largest private dorms in the United States, and at one time was the tallest building in Austin. Michael Dell used to sell computers out of his room on the 27th floor, and director Wes Anderson made minimum wage selling movie tickets in Dobie Theater. Dobie Mall doesn't have any clothing stores and lacks most things associated with your typical mall atmosphere. The first two floors were open to the public and included a food court, a cheap movie theater, a video game arcade, and a military recruiting station. There were a few other small shops, but nothing like the chain stores you'd find in a regular mall. That summer in Austin was the first time since I lived in Jonathan's garage that I had somewhere to come home to. I didn't need much money, just enough for coffee, a little weed, and a few quarters for the arcade. I was as content as a young person could be. By the end of the summer, I couldn't believe how many people I'd met and how many adventures I had. This kind of stuff didn't happen in San Antonio, and I had never felt so free and creative. Knowing that my sister wasn't going to kick me out despite me bringing home the occasional dry grad, gave me peace of mind. I could relax, work on my writing, and enjoy being alive. Toward the end of the summer, I bumped into a former coworker from my days selling newspaper subscriptions in San Antonio. We ran into each other one night at a 7-Eleven gas station. I was surprised to see someone I knew from my newspaper days. Austin felt so far from my hometown, and selling newspapers was the last thing on my mind. My old colleague from the San Antonio Express News excitingly told me that he and a few chosen members of the San Antonio sales crew had been contracted for a one-time only newspaper sales gig at the University of Texas. The job involved selling the Austin American-Statesman paper to newly arriving college students and was going to happen on the drag. They called it the college campaign. This meeting was serendipitous, set up by a higher power. The Statesman, the Austin newspaper, was looking for all the top newspaper salesmen in San Antonio and planned to organize them together so they could move them to Austin, set them up, and have them sell their paper instead. They couldn't find me in San Antonio, the very top salesman, because I was actually already living in Austin. The campaign was an all-out newspaper sales assault on the horde of unsuspecting college students during the first week of classes at UT. Newspaper crews from Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio gathered in Austin to slang their respected papers to the thousands of new and returning students. These kids came from all parts of Texas and moved to Austin the same week. I was a long way from being a University of Texas student, but I was still right in the middle of the action. The first week of classes at UT is an exciting time for everyone, including anyone out to make a buck. There were pitchmen from all over Texas gathered in Austin selling credit cards, magazine subscriptions, and every major newspaper in the state. My crew began setting up booths on campus a week before classes officially started. Anyone and everyone who walked by would be another chump to lay your sales pitch, snag a smile, and get them to get out their parents' credit card and start filling out your form. Most of my customers were young women, and I was 18 years old. It was hard work, but all the kids in the crew made more money than we'd ever had before in our lives. We'd stand folding tables up at different spots on campus selling subscriptions to students walking in between classes. Sometime in the early evening when classes ended for the day, we'd pack up our tables, papers, and t-shirts and start knocking on doors selling subscriptions to all the students in all the trendy college neighborhoods around UT. Even though all of Texas's major newspapers were there, nobody made as much money as the Austin American-Statesman. Most students moving to Austin wanted to forget about their lives back home in Houston, Dallas, or whatever small Texas town they were from. Students, staff, and faculty were much more interested in getting a local paper delivered rather than one that's printed 100 miles away. None of the newspaper kids from San Antonio had stable families or were going to school regularly, so the move 60 miles north to Austin wasn't as traumatic for any of the delinquents. I was already there, one step ahead of my fate in my former newspaper cohorts. Sometimes things work out like they're supposed to. You try to do everything you can to get off course, and you wind up exactly where God intended. It was the best 2-week gig I had ever had. It gave me a chance to establish a relationship with UT and learn about the brilliant people there. I knew in my heart that whatever happened to me in the coming years, this campus and this neighborhood surrounding it was going to be a part of it. Whether I turned into a drag grad or a well-dressed journalism student, I knew this was the setting to whatever story my life was going to tell. So that's from chapter 2 of my wonderful book, Gonzo Education. It's available on Amazon, and